The COVID pandemic in the United States is becoming more and more politically red. A year ago, we wondered, would this happen? And then 6 months ago, we said this will probably happen. And then 3 months ago, we said the data is showing that this is starting to actually happen. But now it's not only completely undeniable, the degree to which in the United States, COVID has become a Republican killer, a Republican virus disproportionately, is quite stunning. And overwhelmingly, the COVID deaths are happening in counties that Donald Trump won. And presumably, logically, overwhelmingly, it is Trump voters who are dying from COVID at much higher rates than Biden voters. Now, would it be enough to influence an election at a congressional district level, in a state, federally? Really still a question mark in terms of the math. But as we've looked at with hypothetical numbers from Florida a few months ago, if this continues to be disproportionately a virus that kills Republicans in the United States because Republicans are disproportionately unvaccinated, it actually could come to make a difference, for example, in something like the Florida gubernatorial election. It's a bit of a stretch, but it's possible. But let's look at the numbers that we have now first. The New York Times has a really good piece on this, which shows how the partisan gap has grown and grown and grown since January 1st, where it was only slightly more likely in January that the COVID deaths were in the Trump counties rather than the Biden counties. Now, remember, this is a chart of COVID death rates. So for people saying, well, there's more people or fewer people. No. This is the rate per 100,000 people. In January, there was a slightly higher rate of death in Trump voting counties than Biden counties. That gap has spread and spread starting around mid-September. It has increased dramatically to the point where now, as you can see here, the cumulative death rate is under 200 deaths per 100,000 people in Biden counties. And it is rapidly approaching 300 deaths per 100,000 people in Trump counties. That is a huge, huge difference. Now, there have been many attempts, I guess I would call them, by various right wingers of different stripes to explain this difference away by saying, well, the difference is weather in those places, or the difference is age in these places, in Trump versus Biden counties. But when you examine the data, it's not supported by fact. And as it's pointed out in the New York Times article about these numbers, if the difference was due to weather or age, we would have seen that partisan split last year. But instead, we are seeing a dramatic increase in that partisan split over the last few months. What we are seeing is a shift in what determines who is most likely to die. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. At the start of the pandemic, we've talked about this now, we've said this before, the deaths were most likely to be happening in the places that had, we would call it, the misfortune of being early infection sites because of the direct flights to and from the early infected regions of China and some countries in Europe like Italy. So you had New York, New Jersey. You had Boston with that early conference and many nonstop flights to Asia, for example, and a few other spots. That early, that was what indicated who was getting hit the hardest. We now have a very different situation. We now know about how the virus spreads. We now have it everywhere, so to speak. And we now have vaccination widely available. And now the biggest distinguishing factor between the Trump counties and the Biden counties is the level of vaccination. 40% of Republican adults are not vaccinated. Only 10% of Democratic registered adults are unvaccinated. That is why the COVID deaths are concentrated not in major metropolitan areas, but rather on a rate basis. Remember, we're talking about a rate of death. The deaths are increasingly concentrated where conservatives tend to live, more suburban and rural areas, because they have a far lower rate of vaccination. Now, it doesn't just apply to deaths. If you look at cases, we are seeing a big partisan gap there as well. It was biggest in August. And now, thanks to the national decline in COVID cases, although the last 10 days make us wonder whether cases are going to go back up, we now see still a partisan gap on cases, but a slightly smaller one than we had in August. So COVID is getting more and more politically red. It's not it's not a surprising thing that we are seeing this increasingly ravage Republicans at this point in time. And there's a good chance, I mean, even when we say, look at the death rate in this Biden county, it stands to reason that because Republicans are disproportionately unvaccinated, that even in Biden counties, the deaths happening there skew towards the Republican Party. So every country is different. In the United States, we increasingly are seeing this as a Republican pandemic. Does it mean liberals can't die? Of course not. The virus doesn't discriminate on the basis of politics. However, vaccination is the greatest indicator as to where we are seeing the virus kill more versus fewer people. And it is Republicans who are disproportionately unvaccinated. So we're going to keep following these numbers, but it is a trend we expected. It's the trend we started to see. And the degree to which we are now seeing it is quite stunning. Do Republicans care, even if they don't care about the people that are dying? Maybe they don't. Maybe they do. I don't know. You'd have to ask them. At some point, don't you think that they would wake up and say, hey, this is killing our voters more than it is killing their voters? And merely from the perspective of like a pragmatic election strategy, at some point you would imagine they would start saying, hey, you know, I mean, like, this isn't good. Maybe we should go and get ourselves vaccinated. Science has shown us that lowering your body temperature at night helps you sleep. I can't sleep in a hot room. That's why I love our sponsor, Chili Sleep, which makes customizable climate-controlled sleep solutions to sleep better. Their flagship products are the Uller sleep system and the Cube sleep system, which is what I have. Both are hydro-powered, temperature-controlled luxury mattress pads. You can make them as cold as 55 degrees Fahrenheit. If you wanted, you could go as hot as 115 degrees. I like the cooler option. I keep mine at 60 degrees, and it gives me a great cool night of sleep. No feeling hot, no more sweating. I'm falling asleep faster, and it pairs perfectly with Chili Sleep's weighted Chili Blanket, which keeps you cold on top, too. They'll give you 20% off everything when you go to chilisleep.com/Pacman. The link is right underneath this video.